Good morning, everybody. My name is Tom. I'm the curate at Ascension, and it is so good to be Ascension together with you. So, for those of us who are going through the Sunday morning service, we've just heard the Bible reading from Luke chapter 7, read by Victoria and John. Thank you so much for reading that. If you're catching up with the message of the week during the week, you might not have seen the passage. Now would be a great time to have a look at it. And these are such powerful words, so we've got to spend a bit of time exploring, and there are so many crazy things that are going on in here that we won't have time to explore, but we've got to explore three of them, I think, this morning that are important for us. So the centurion cried out to Jesus, the centurion got others to cry out with him, and the centurion never actually saw Jesus face to face. So let's explore those 3 points. Firstly, the centurion cried out to Jesus. That is an astounding one. The centurion. So to be appointed as a centurion in that position of power and authority, he would have had to demonstrate that he was a person of character and integrity. Though he was enemy occupier, even funded their place of religious worship. So he had means, he was wealthy. So he was wealthy, had good character, he just so much this sense of his self-reliance. You think this is a capable person, he can just get on with life. And I don't know about you, but for me that is a big temptation of self-reliance. I've got capability, I can do things, and so easily I slip into the pattern of feeling like I've got to just do it all, I've got to handle it on my own. And so in that context, it is amazing that the centurion cried out to Jesus, a person of authority and power who had servants, slaves, and soldiers at his command, realized that he couldn't handle this. He needed to cry out, and he saw that Jesus was the one to cry out to. At our men's breakfast on last Saturday, we heard from Neil about his recent trip. Just a couple of months ago, he came staggering back into church, having just been to the South Pole. Mind-blowing. So I caught up with Neil in the week because I felt like the story he'd shared was such a great illustration for us this morning.
Bizarrely, I went to the South Pole because I'd just been to the North Pole, so successfully managed to go to the top of the world. And when we got home, I came back to the news that my cousin had a brain tumour, and I was subsequently invited to an expedition to the South Pole to raise money for brain tumour awareness, which is the biggest killer of men under 40 in this country. And so I couldn't say no. So hence I found myself at the beginning of the year in January in Antarctica, skiing the last degree towards the South Pole.
And at the men's breakfast, you shared a very particular story about one moment.
You know, Antarctica is a very remote and dangerous place. And we were on the Antarctic Plateau, which is 10,000 feet up, skiing and trekking at minus 43 to the South Pole. And on the Tuesday afternoon, there was this enormous explosion, earth tremor experience where the ground literally shook, and this was unexpected. And you can see as far as the eye in Antarctica. There's nothing to break up the horizon. And yet after this earth tremor, we turned round and we saw literally as far as the eye can see this ice wall, this tsunami, this wave of snow and ice, and it was moving towards us at what felt like a rapid pace, and we had no idea if it was 20 miles away or 200 miles away because you have no depth of field perspective. And we had a huddle together, and it was decided to dig in because we couldn't outrun it. It was getting bigger, and so we put the tents up in a line that the snow would hit. We strapped all the sledges together. We dug a huge wall in front of the tents to try and break up the power with which this would hit. But in the middle of that, you kind of knew that if it did hit, then the chances of survival were zero because we were miles from anywhere. You know, I was sort of overcome with fear, subsequently followed by, you know, as I said to the men's breakfast, what would Marcus do was my first thought. And that the response was, he'd pray. And so, and these were with a group of tough men. There were 11 of us, very hardened individuals. And I went into the tent and I got in my sleeping bag and I just prayed. I shut my eyes and I prayed. I prayed for salvation, to be spared certain death, and for my teammates to be spared, and for their families to be spared. You know, the news. And you know, I just prayed, can you divert the storm? Can you stop the storm, please, God, and save us? And then this calm came over me, and there was little to do other than to get into your sleeping bag. And we left messages on our iPhones for our loved ones and children. I took the satellite phone and I phoned Nix. I didn't say I was in imminent danger. I just had a chat, see how she was. It was so nice to hear her voice, and I hung up and I wept because I just thought that was the last time I would hear the voice of a loved one. And then I fell asleep, and in the morning the storm had passed, and my fears had been allayed, and we came out of the tents and it was calm, and there was no sign of the snowstorm, there was no sign of anything, and we just sort of all had a hug and kind of embraced and said, whoa. And then it was all like, okay, let's get back to work, let's put one foot in front of the other to get to the South Pole.
Gosh, what a story. Thank you, Neil, so much for sharing that. And you might be feeling like, wow, that is just so far out of the realms of everyday experience. How does that relate to us? And I was really helped in that in our breakout prayer groups at the men's breakfast, that one of the men I was with pointed out that actually each of us face our own tsunamis. Those things, I don't know if you can think about them, things that seem way off in the distance and you can't quite work out what scale they are, but it feels ominous, and it seems like if they hit, you're going to be completely overwhelmed. What sort of tsunamis have you faced? Maybe even tsunamis facing now. The obvious one, I guess, is coronavirus. That it has been building, gathering, and we're feeling the effects of it already. And some of that daunting aspect might be in terms of the ill health and the scariness of that. It might also be the economic impact. Maybe you've got a business that feels like it might not survive, and you're worried about the people who are dependent on the income that you provide, and you're not going to be able to care for them. Maybe it's kind of really big scale, overwhelming things like environmental damage or poverty around the world that just seems so set in. Maybe it's just really local and particular. Someone you love and who you care about who seems to be falling apart. Maybe you're trapped in a situation with someone you can't trust. What are the storm waves that are coming? The story that we heard was that Centurion, faced with the storm of the servant that he cared for, the slave even, that he cared about, he wanted to cry out, and he saw that Jesus was the one to cry out to. And it doesn't need to be that we actually have a coherent, well planned out argument that we present to Jesus as to why we request his help. I want to just share from my own story. 8 years ago, I went through treatment for cancer, testicular cancer. And there was one particular day, a couple of days after I'd had chemotherapy treatment, where I found that I was beginning to descend into a panic attack. And if you've experienced that, you might have had the same experience as me, where you can see it happening, but it doesn't really make sense, but there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And as well as that developing, I then started getting muscle spasms in my neck. And I can still see vividly now that a church family very kindly was able to drop things and look after baby Joshua for us so that Helen could drive me to the hospital. And as we were driving through the streets, I can see the images now out the car window as I was pleading with God. And it wasn't that I had a particular thing that I was pleading. I guess now I can think of things that I might ask for. But just in that moment, I didn't have a particular thing I was pleading. It was just pleading to Jesus. I just wanted to have his hand to hold. On that particular day, stretching into the dark night, the way that his touch reached me was through Helen being there, through my parents who rushed across the country to be at my bedside, and through the medical team who, despite years of working, hadn't seen these symptoms, but they had been diligent in their study, and they had been drawing in from the scientific knowledge of others who had been diligent in study to know that the reaction I was showing was some sort of allergy to the concoction of medications that I had been given. And so they were able to find the antidote in the hospital pharmacy and gradually bring my body under control. In everything, just like the centurion, we can cry out to Jesus. We don't need to have a coherent argument or particular reason, justification. We can just cry out, and Jesus seems to be willing to listen. In every situation, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So the centurion cried out to Jesus, as unexpected as that would seem. But also the centurion got others to cry out with him. Did you see that in the story, that he got the Jewish elders of that town to go as his representatives to Jesus, and then later he sent another delegation of friends to cry out to Jesus. And just in the last few months at Ascension, that has been wonderful to see. We've got an Ascension WhatsApp prayer group, and just through that there has been so much crying out to Jesus and sharing across the church community as we cry out together. Crying out to Jesus is a community activity. Just from the past month, here are some things that I want to share that we've cried out for together as a community. A 10-year-old boy of a friend who's in hospital with dengue fever, a grandparent who was hospitalised, recruitment of a school worker, someone in hospital with a bad flare-up of asthma, a parent facing a cancer diagnosis, a friend bereaved through coronavirus, family struggling with lockdown relationships, a friend in an induced coma because of coronavirus, participants in the Alpha course, a church family in the midst of childbirth, previous congregation member in the end of life care, and then for the family after his death, a 9-year-old girl in a high dependency unit, an older member of our congregation who's in confusion, family member who aren't Christians, a friend in hospital with coronavirus, members of our church family struggling to pray. We don't need to do this alone. We're surrounded by a great crowd of witnesses. They are witnesses on our behalf to Jesus, but also witnesses to us of Jesus, the things that they have experienced from Jesus in the past, and they can testify to us. When you need to cry out, then do that with others around you who can cry out to Jesus on your behalf. And when others cry out and ask for your help, join in. It can feel really unsatisfactory, isn't it? You don't know quite what to pray, or you also feel inconsistent, like you're not giving it all the welly that it needs. And also then the doubt as to whether Jesus is actually going to do anything. But this is the invitation we are given through this story about the centurion, that Jesus is ready to listen as we cry out together to him. So the centurion cried out to Jesus. The centurion got others to cry out with him. But the third one was the centurion never actually encountered Jesus face to face. The story conveys amazing faith, so amazing that Jesus was amazed. Can you believe that? God made human found a human being's response amazing. That this man had the faith that Jesus didn't even need to be there bodily, but the word of Jesus was powerful enough to bring miracles. The temptation is to feel like, gosh, my faith is not in that place. I don't have that level of trust. But I don't think that was Luke's purpose in writing it down in his account. I think Luke was wanting to demonstrate that actually we can have faith in the Jesus who we are not going to encounter face to face in this phase of God's story. But we can trust his powerful word. The centurion trusted and saw the miraculous effect. And we can trust Jesus right now, even though we're not going to see him face to face. When we cry out to him, we can trust that his word is powerful. And we've got to sit with the discomfort that he won't necessarily answer our request as we like it. But as we reach out trusting him, part of the trust is that we trust his answer will be the right thing in God's will. And so when we're crying out, we're definitely crying out that we will get to see Jesus soon. Your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That is something we have to keep crying out to Jesus about, for his kingdom to come on earth. But we're also crying out for the everyday. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation. Deliver us from evil, the overwhelming storms. We cry out to Jesus for those things of everyday life, the storms that seem overwhelming, the things that keep rubbing and irritating that we struggle to cope with. Jesus invites us to cry out to him with all of that. And his word is powerful. So, just like the Centurion, with all the storms that we are facing, whatever they might be, we're invited to cry out to Jesus day by day in the everyday mess of life. And like the Centurion, we can get others to cry out with us. And when others are crying out, we can join in with their heart's cry to Jesus. We are in this as a community together. Just like the Centurion, we're not going to see Jesus face to face now, but we can trust that his word is powerful. It has been at work in the world powerfully and will continue today for us.